I call this meeting of the Northeast Independent School Board to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. The time is 5:30. Item 2, board team building and training. And we have Dr. Greg Gibson here to facilitate this meeting this evening. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. I bring greetings from one of your past employees, Otika Gibson, and she just wanted me to share that she hopes this is important because all she knows is she's cleaning horse stalls by herself tonight with no help from me. So anyway, got that out of the way.
Please tell her that we say thank you and this is important.
All right. I tried to leave it in as good a shape as I could earlier today. Like we gauge our life on how the barn, if the barn is okay, then life is okay. And so I left the barn in pretty good shape this morning. It's good to see all of you again. I don't know that I've met everybody. There's a few new faces, but for those of you that I haven't met, it was about a year ago or more that we launched a process in this very room. And I'm happy to be back here. It's very typical. A year after the launch of a scorecard, utilizing the scorecard as a performance management framework to come back and just check in. And a lot of the boards that I'm working with, and President Grona, I mean, we're somewhere around 125 or so school. Yeah, I'm getting a little road weary, but it's okay. And I think if we hit a niche post-COVID, it was kind of like, how do we recalibrate and get our compass back? For what's the most important stuff. And so that we'll talk about that tonight. At the very least, you'll get your 3 hours of board credit. I hope that it's more than just that, but I am certified, for those of you that don't know, to grant you your board credit. I'll leave you homework related to that also, and then I'm always open for follow-up conversation. In fact, tomorrow afternoon from 1 p.m. until 5 p.m., I am getting recertified with Texas Education Agency. And I remember being certified on January the 6th, 2001, 2000. I was distracted, I'll just say it that way. There were things happening at the Capitol the very day that I was being certified, so I paid enough attention to pass the test at the end, but I was watching my iPad pretty closely. But anyway, you'll get your board credit. We can do team of 8, and because of your utilization of the balanced scorecard and the components that are built within that, if anyone, especially new trustees, are needing ISO training, the evaluating and improving student outcomes, I'm eligible to grant that as well. And as long as we're using the scorecard and talking about performance management, then that qualifies for that. In way of introduction to a couple of the new trustees and then reintroduction, and I won't go too deeply because I know several of you relatively well, but just as a reminder, I became a superintendent in Graham ISD, where I now have moved back 2 years later, and I stay out of school business, by the way. I live out in the country, and I rarely go to town. In fact, I've been accused of not even living there because I don't even have to go through Graham on the way to DFW Airport. But I was 31 or 32 years old, didn't really want to be a superintendent necessarily, wasn't opposed to it, but didn't necessarily want to be the superintendent. And just because of happenstance, I just became the superintendent one night at a board meeting, literally. And I think back to that time because it was just kind of, I had been at central office, and I had been the HR director, the curriculum director, and the finance manager, for that district for the 3 prior years to that. So I had a good working knowledge of the district, but it's still kind of like just, you're standing near the deep end of the pool and somebody just, shoves you in. So you're 31 years old and you're the decision maker. I walked into church the next Sunday, and in my mind, I was seeing that there was going to be a round of applause, and people turned their backs to me that I'd known my whole life. It's just like, oh, okay. It's first clue that this isn't all that it's cracked up to be. It got really quiet around me. It's almost like there was a bubble, that nobody talked. Anyway, that was the joy that I experienced for nearly 23 years as a superintendent. One of the things that I may or may not have mentioned the last time I was here that I think is worth mentioning is my father was the school board president at the nearby town, the rivalry town, Graham and Breckenridge, Texas. Our ranch that I grew up on when he wasn't football coaching is literally on the county line and the school district line. So the front porch of the house was in Graham ISD and the back porch of the house was in Breckenridge ISD. So I went to school in Breckenridge ISD and actually graduated from there, and then went to work for Graham ISD, which was almost heresy. If you're from, like, I had to literally turn everything in that was green, you know, because you can't keep a Breckenridge letter jacket if you're going to work for them. But so my dad is the board president. And, you know, I'm 31 and working on a doctorate and trying to raise 3 kids that are about this big and screaming and yelling all the time and running around. And I took the oldest one out with me every Saturday morning. We ate breakfast with my mom and dad on the ranch, and then I did what any respectable 31-year-old superintendent did. I helped my dad. You know, I built a fence, we fed cows, and, you know, we just did ranch work, and I took my oldest son with me. And one of the beauties of that time period for me is I had a board president who loved me that was talking straight to me. If you follow what I'm saying, it's your dad. And so, you know, I'm popping off all these PhD terms I'm learning, you know, and all this, and then I'm getting, son, if you ever talk like that in a board meeting, if those people, you know, like, I'm getting like straight talk. And, you know, he said something, he said a lot of things that helped me immensely, I think, accelerate maybe, you know, my foundation as a superintendent. But one of the things that really, you know, stuck out was, you know, a blunt statement like, you know, if you don't want us to tell you what we think is important and take over the meeting, then we need to know what's important. And we need to have updates on what's important. And in the absence of that, in the vacuum of that, we're going to do whatever we do. And now, by the way, he was a coach, an English teacher, and so he had the educator background, but he had gone in and he was a successful businessman. So the concept of the scorecard that you all utilize, that little space in my head got formed right at 31 years old. That and, you know, in my mind, I'm thinking, let's, you know, click on, PowerPoint was just starting at that time. And the other thing my dad said was, if all you have is a PowerPoint, you have neither. Now, he left it right there. I had to think about it for a while. His point was, you have neither power nor a point if that's all you have is a PowerPoint. So I learned real quickly, and all to say that early development of a scorecard approach, I actually started in Graham, you know, at 33 or 34 years old. You know, like, can we get together as a team, board members and senior leaders, and agree on, I keep pointing to y'all's compass on the wall, you know, like, what's our true north, or northeast in this case? Like, what's our direction? And then, again, in way of introduction, I left Graham, went to Crowley ISD. I was the second superintendent in Crowley ISD ever. My predecessor had been superintendent for 51 years. And, you know, they had grown from 500 kids to 15,000 kids, and nothing had really changed with respect to systems. And so, truthfully, I was the superintendent of 21 independent school districts, i.e. campuses. Like, every campus was just an island in and of itself. So the thought that I had about scorecard before that took on new flavor, you know, that we've got to get, there has to be a common language across, you know, all of these 21, 22 campuses. And by the way, we were growing a campus a year. So every year a campus is opening. My sense of urgency is like skyrocketing, because we don't even have what it takes to train the campus that we're opening next year and the campus that we're opening next year. So at that time, I became a national Baldrige examiner just by accident, but I'm still a national Baldrige examiner. I'm actually on the panel of overseers now. I don't do the actual scoring, but I oversee the group that oversees the group that does the scoring. And that's when I went pretty deep into systems thinking. So I wound up at SCUC after that, and most of you, I think some of you on the board know that I became a TRS board member. So I was the superintendent of Schertz-Cibolo, and there were 3 seats on the TRS board, the teacher retirement system, that were open for existing administrators or staff members. So there was like a counselor from North Texas, and I was a superintendent on there, and then there was a retired teacher from South Texas. And we, on those positions, you have to run a statewide election, and then still the governor may or may not choose you, depending on your voting background and your kid's Facebook page, I found out. So we turned off everybody's Instagram and like you shut it all off, the appointments next year. So I'm now 10 years into being a superintendent. I feel pretty good about systems. We've got a relatively good situation going in SCUC with several retired military folk that hired me, truthfully, because they wanted systems in SCUC. And I feel pretty good about myself, generally speaking. And then I'm leaving Schertz-Cibolo as a superintendent, driving to Austin, and when I walk in that big TRS building, when my feet cross the threshold, I'm a board member. I'm not a superintendent anymore. And I've got to tell you, that was the hardest thing that I've done in my whole life, was become a board member, like literally in the parking lot. I'm a superintendent, talking on the phone, hang up, and then I'm a board member the second I walk in. And David Collinette, still a friend of mine, was a trustee that had been on the TRS board for a number of years. And he, I went over to get some coffee, and you're on the camera, and then you get off the camera and you're getting your coffee, but you're still in the room and there's still a quorum. So I noticed he got up to get his coffee right when I got up to get my coffee. So I thought, he wants to say something to me. And he said, "Hey, Greg, now the meeting's going on. I'm standing over here with David." He said, "You're saying a lot of really good things, asking a lot of really good questions." And I'm like, I've been on the, TRS board for 2 months, and my chest kind of pokes out, and it's, like, okay. And he said, secondly, he said, "In fact, I can't really disagree with anything that you're bringing up. Even feeling even better." And he was stirring his coffee, and I'll never forget, he threw the little stir thing down, and he just kind of caught my ear as he turned around, and he said, "The way you're going about it sucks." And he just went and sat down. And so, yeah, all that air that I puffed my chest out, just completely deflated. And the thing is, what I realized, I rolled into TRS pretty hot with preconceived notion of what needed to change, and I wanted it to change immediately. And the reality was there wasn't a structure for the change that I felt like needed to happen, and I wasn't even considering the other trustees in that notion. So that night, David Collinette and I had dinner, and he made sure that all the trustees were there, and he said, "I've got everybody here, talk, like what," and basically he was laying out, this is the long game. This isn't you rolling in here. Everybody's agreeing with a lot of the things you're saying, but you've got a picture in your mind of like 2 or 3 months of stuff happening, and this is going to be 2 or 3 years before we even get started on it. And it really just set me back, but then he's right. And truthfully, a lot of the materials, just so you all know, that I'll share with you tonight as resource documents were not developed as me as a superintendent or ex-superintendent trying to train boards. It's actually the stuff that I was reading and reviewing, trying to become a better TRS board member. That's where this started. Someone the other day said, "Well, did you train all the boards that you worked?" No, they trained me. Like that. It was a partnership. This was my way of trying to understand how to be a better board member. So here in just a little bit, when we do a little bit of a background, I just want y'all to think about that. That was me studying, trying to be a better TRS board member. That's where this came from. The wrapping up in way of introduction, tonight we're going to do our annual or the first check-in, rather, on Team Trust Survey and the Good Governance Inventory. You took it a year ago, or the board at that time took it a year ago. Those are eligible, the Team Trust, to be considered in executive session. So I think you've got it posted, I saw, for us to go have that conversation. We will take the Team Trust and the Good Governance Inventory right here at the front of the meeting. So I apologize right up front for walking in here and saying, hey, let's take a test, pop test. But we have Deloitte and Touche is going to actually score it for us while I give the introduction. And then that way we'll be prepared to look and talk and have good conversation about those results. And at the end of the night, we can hopefully work towards reaching consensus on what the follow-up actions may be. And you know, if you're sitting there, you know, thinking, you know, we don't need follow-up actions. Well, this is all about continuous improvement. So every board, everywhere, every school district, everywhere, there's another ring of success. So it doesn't matter what success you've accomplished, there's always one more step to take. So I proposed a couple of underlying questions here at the end of the agenda that you have. So are our good governance expectations clear in writing and transparent? So we say we want to do a certain thing as a team of 8. You know, do we have that in writing somewhere? Is it transparent, and are we staying true to it? And then the second, just kind of underlying question, are we, the strategic team, and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit, modeling continuous improvement to the staff and the community? In other words, are we setting the tone for continuous improvement as a team of 7 in your case right now, typically 8, because we cannot ask the superintendent and the senior leader team to go out and perform with the performance management system that's highly complicated if we're not modeling continuous improvement also. And that's where the TRS, David Collinet, got me. Because he's like, you're asking the staff to do stuff that we don't even do as a board. And so I think, this is David talking to Greg, we should practice what we expect, and then we can only expect it when we are practicing it ourselves. And I couldn't argue with him, right? I had to just sit back and say, you're right. So we developed protocols for the board to try to get better before we tried to develop protocols for the staff at TRS to get better. The first time I was here, I believe I said I would be shocked if I didn't, that with respect to the performance management system that the relatively new superintendent at that time was implementing, that the ceiling of performance for the district is set by the levels of trust at the strategic team level with each other and at the cabinet level or tactical team level with and between each other, and then ultimately between the tactical team. I'm pointing there, your tactical team is much better than that, but y'all know it, like there's a lot of, this is the upline to a lot of other administrators, that's the tactical team. Then ultimately there's team trust between the tactical team and the strategic team. And if, I believe strongly in this, that you cannot set expectations for the superintendent and others to go deliver performance objectives that exceed the levels of trust within and between this team, within and between this team, and then between these two teams. It's irresponsible to say, oh, we don't, have the high levels of trust, but go ahead and create the highest performing district in the state of Texas. It just makes no sense. So all to say, the first time I was here, I said, trustees, you're setting the ceiling on the performance with our good governance practice and our team. I was driving in earlier, nice little drive, had plenty of time to think, and listening to podcasts about schools and Texas politics, which is what I do. And you're just thinking to myself, public education in Texas, and probably ubiquitous to the country, if not the world, is challenging on a good day. And it's becoming more and more challenging. I can't live without this thing, but I can also see more garbage with this thing, in 30 seconds. And so the amplification of everything that's negative in the world, is coming to us faster. So it's hard, I would even say very difficult to perform highly in public education on a good day. That's assuming that we've got all the team trust and everything that I mentioned earlier. Even when you have all that, it's still hard to deliver in today's world. The other thing that I said, and this is the final introductory comment, but just a reminder that this, and David Colanetta said this, and I'll never forget it, but as a board, we do not have to be uniform, but ultimately we have to be unified. And if you're not taking the time, Greg, he's looking straight at me and pointing at me, to help us unify around a common direction, then we're just gonna, and that was part of my beef, is that I felt like the board was just going in different directions, TRS board. And he was like, you're not even saying what we should unify around. And so then we run the risk of being accused of saying that what we're asking for is uniformity. And we're not asking for in fact, I think school boards may be the last hope of democracy, truthfully, if I'm being honest. Because now we're starting to see state government look like federal government, in a state that had claimed forever, won't happen here, we'll never act like DC. And then, I mean, I'm not saying it is, but it's starting to feel a whole lot like it. Truthfully, at night, and this sounds a little bit Pollyanna, but I mean, I go to sleep thankful that there are city councils and school boards out there making most of the decisions. Now, with that comes a big responsibility, right? That we've got to make the best decisions that we can. So anyway, this is not tonight about being uniform. It's just about being unified. And that's easy to say, and it's hard to do. You got to work at it. Otika reminds me regularly, me saying I love you one time a year, and thinking that's enough. And I'm not saying that we've got to tell each other we love each other, but trust is like a relationship with a spouse, in my opinion. If you're not working on it, you can't assume that it stays at the level that you were at on the high points. It just, it starts slipping. It starts slipping. And that's the way trust is. Trust is never static. You don't achieve like high trust or even good trust, and then it just stay there. It's in a state of atrophy as we speak. Like it's going down as we speak. So if we're not being intentional about either holding it at a decent enough level or even building it to a high level, we're naive if we think it's just staying put. It's going down. And I believe strongly in that. So that's part of what tonight is. How do we build levels of trust between these two teams? And by the way, this isn't a pitch just for Northeast. This is the same pitch for all 125 districts, that if we're not working on it, it's going down. So we've just got to continue to work on it. Having said that, Ms. Turner, the inventories are in their packets. Is that correct? Thank you. So in your, here we go. Like, I'm not going to ask y'all to assess me. I'm giving you a pop quiz right off the bat. But there are two inventories in your packet. Real quickly, some of you have seen them before. On the good governance inventory, there are 3 responses possible. So when you read the prompt, you either answer yes, or you answer no, or I don't know. And those, all 3 of there are there for a reason. If you don't know, you don't know. If one is blank, we're going to check it as a don't know. If one is left blank, fair enough? Okay, so these are general practice, and if you think that you may be a certain thing with the concept, that is like a yes or a no with the concept, but you're not for sure about the language, then just say I don't know, because that's more about the language that's in here and not necessarily about the action that's occurring. On the team trust, the we in the team trust is we, the board. So in your mind, you could just put in parentheses, we, the board, get quality result. We, the board, solve problems. Does that make, does that help? Like just think, we, the board. This is a 5-point Likert scale. I've thought I should have done it before tonight, but no opinion kind of has a negative connotation. I think I'm just going to put neutral there. Does that make sense? So think about 3 as neutral. Like I'm not falling out on one side or the other on this prompt. Not necessarily no opinion, because your opinion, you have to have an opinion even if you choose number 3, right? I'm choosing that I'm neutral. So think of 3 more like neutral. This is a perception survey. There's no right or wrong. We want it to be anonymous. I think I did this the last time. Don't write your name on it, please. If you want your result back when we debrief the group results, if you'll put a little symbol or something, a number in the bottom right-hand corner that means something to you and no one else, does that make sense? Then that way you'll spot yours here in a little bit when I fan them out. But it doesn't matter who says what on this. President Grona, is that clear enough? So we'll take 5 minutes or so and just let everybody check their boxes. Yeah, do both. Thank you, Ms. Huey. Do both of them now, and then we'll have the results of both of them. And I'm going to give a quick overview of some things while they're being scored, and then we'll get into the data. That's perfect. failed. In my defense, it's hidden behind the light switch, but good afternoon, Madam President, board members, Dr. Micah, executive staff, and guests. When I got to the side of it, I could see it finally.
We don't have to like start over.
Okay, all right, yeah, no, my name is Greg. I drove here. Yeah, we'll leave it where we are. So in your packet, while these are being scored, so 15 or 20 minutes here, and again, President Grona, and trustees, these are background materials, and I'm not going to read to you tonight, but when we started a year ago, at that time, and new trustees, I apologize, are new since then, that, and Peggy, or Sean, if you'll remind me, Dr. Micah, I will send the models. These charts are actually expansions on just these models that you all saw. So if you remember, President Grona, trustees, like we had the strategic role, and we had a description in this box, and then we had the tactical role, and we had a description in that box, and we had operational role. So the point, there it is. Thank you. Hold that up, Mr. Hilliard, if you don't. So, yeah, so that's from the last time. And so what that model on the first in your packet is 3 essential roles in an aligned system. And so what this chart is an expansion of that model. And so what you have on the model is actually number 1. So if you'll track with me, so like what's going across on number 1, that's what's in the model. So what we've done is just added 3 more layers to that overview of that model, if that makes sense. So number 1, again, is primary responsibilities, roles and responsibilities. That's in the model. So getting a little more granular, how does the strategic role spend its time and energy? How does the tactical team spend its time and energy? And then how does the operational team, frontline, spend its time and energy? And so at the start of that, if you're tracking from left to right, number 2 coming across, if you just think about it in terms of action verbs, so the strategic role, the board, you're envisioning, you're systematically monitoring, and you're ensuring that the community that's elected you, that we're delivering on the performance objectives that we had on chart paper, y'all remember, stuck all over everything in here that night. We're in like year 1 of implementation towards those goals from that night, those targets. So there's nothing magical to this, and again, I'm not going to read to you, but I want to hit the high point of each of these. So when you move to the tactical team, you move from envisioning and systematically monitoring and ensuring to, now I'm pointing over here, planning, implementing, progress monitoring, and reporting. And tonight at some point I would like to talk about the cadence of the reporting on these strategic targets that were just a bunch of dots and in sticky notes all over the front of this room a year ago. So they're thinking, like we left that night, we got scorecard finished. Now then the tactical team starts going to, okay, thank goodness, first of all, that this is a 4-year plan, because that's a lot. But then, okay, we can't say this first, because if you say that first, we lose it, when it goes out to the campuses. So we have to say this first. That's what the tactical team does. And then down at the front line, or out at the front line, they're implementing. They are progress monitoring also, if we're doing it right. They're progress monitoring at each subunit. Then there's a mechanism for them to report at all of the subunits to the tactical team, where we aggregate all that together to show to the strategic team. I know that's simple. The ISO training that I mentioned earlier, evaluating and improving student outcomes, here it is in a nutshell. An objective is set by the board. That's what you guys set on the scorecard. The tactical team then brought you guys back actions aligning to those objectives. Remember that, okay. Then that's an input. An action is an input in a system. It's the stuff you're putting into the system. Then how do we measure it along the way is an output. In other words, checkpoint measures, not big measures at the end, but checkpoint measures, that's the output. And then at the end of the year, typically, and especially in public education, at the end of the year, we get a big data set on, did all these checkpoints get to that number that we wanted to move by the end of the year? And in your case, I think you all were looking at Dr. Mike, a 4 or 5 year plan, 4-year. And so then we also have a notion of what that big number is by the end of the 4th year, if that makes sense. That's evaluating and improving student outcome training in a nutshell. Actions are inputs, outputs are measures along the way, outcomes are big measures at the end of the year or at the end of the 4-year. I hate to say that ISO training is that simple, but that's really the bottom line. The fact that you all are utilizing a scorecard and hearing these reports, to me, qualifies you to, like, you're not just hearing a report from, a training and a PowerPoint. I'm up here clicking about the theory of that. You actually have a protocol that you're using it. And so that's why I don't think that we have to sit here and click through slides, because you're actually using that protocol. All right, the third component of the area of alignment is how does the strategic role support the tactical and operational role? How does the tactical role support the strategic and operational role? And then how does the operational role typically support the tactical role? And then the tactical role transfers that to the strategic role. That one's a little bit differently. So in the strategic role, the question that we believe that you should be asking yourself is, how do I hear updates on tactical and operational information and not leave the strategic role? I think Dr. Micah framed it up, I think the first night I was here, like, this is your night to go into the weeds. When we do the report, that's your night to go into the weeds, and we're gonna go there. And I think I might have added, take a granola bar and a bottle of water. It's a day hike. Don't pop a tent, and definitely don't bring an RV or build a cabin, because it's the tactical team saying we're going to take a deep dive. And by the way, I think I told you all this before. Some superintendents think we've missed the mark right here. Like, we're trying to get board members out of the weeds, and then you're doing these reports, and you're just inviting them into the weeds. And I'm going back to my dad, looking at me out of his readers across the fence, driving T-posts. If you don't tell me how it's going, don't tell me not to ask a bunch of questions. If you're not showing me how it's going, and I love it, he said, if you show me one more picture of a kid in science goggles eating birthday cake and tell me that school is great because of that, I'm going to throw it all back at you. He said, I'm not opposed to science experiments, and I'm not opposed to birthday cake, but don't equate that picture to success. I'm not that dumb. He's the board member, right? That's what so data points, I'm not saying you don't take a bunch of pictures and show them off, Ms. Chancellor. I'm not saying that. That's very important. But, if that's the only tool you have for success, you all have built a very robust set of data points to look at to monitor success. The tactical description on number 3, I think bears just repeating here. So how do we share information with the board, the tactical team, both good and bad, and not get defensive? Like, that's part of this. Like, we've got to have, this is where trust comes in, hugely. Because if there's not team trust, in this case, between the tactical team and the strategic team, then the presentation gets whitewashed because we fear, what's going to happen if we tell the truth. It's not unique to Northeast ISD. Happen all the time in Schertz-Civil University City ISD. If there's not high levels of trust there, it's hard to tell the truth if the truth is not that pretty. I would hope that any trustee and any board in the state of Texas would be okay with less than stellar data as long as you're hearing what's the plan to move it from less than stellar to stellar. Okay, I saw his nodding almost immediately. You even knew where I was going with it. That's my experience with 3 boards for 25 years, is that anytime I shared that this isn't exactly where we want it to, as long as I followed with, here's the plan, grace was given. Even sometimes in one of the districts when it was pretty dismal. Like, we had a lot that we were undoing in one of the 3 districts I was at, trying to build systems. But as long as I was communicating, and there were some tough times in that district at the board level and at the senior leader level, but as long as we were staying consistent with data points, and if we didn't like where it was, we were telling the board where we thought how we could get it to where it needed to be, the board showed grace, the strategic team. And then in the fourth bullet there, and again, not to read to you, but just a reminder, the strategic role works on the system. The tactical team flexes between on the system. When they're sitting in the room tonight, this group especially, like this is working on the system. Then they leave, and it may be happening right now on their devices, they can't get out of in the system because what they're running never stops, right? So they're in the system, but they flex between on the system, in the system. The strategic role should stay on the system, constantly working on the system. Now you're listening for, again, back to my dad, you're listening for what's happening in the system, but you're thinking about it through this big strategic lens. That was what David Colanetta was telling me. No one here, Dr. Gibson, he would say, everyone here believes that you know what the staff at TRS should be doing. No one doubts that. It's how you're going about delivering that to those staff members that's causing the problem. Because you're getting in the weeds and you're leaving and you're making other board members get frustrated. And I didn't know they had committees when I came in, and I was all in everybody's committees, telling them what they should do. Does that make sense? I wasn't respecting the structure that was already there. So I slowed down, did it right, I believe. All right, fair enough on the expansion. Any questions or thoughts or comments?
Actually, I do have a question when you're talking about in the strategic role, I guess good practices on how you balance that when you're in effect mandated to get into the weeds on things by state law or something of that nature. I mean, we're ultimately responsible for some things that come, well, all things that come across our desk, but I mean, there are state statutes that say the board must do this. And so we can't just, we can take a recommendation, but then we have to ultimately get into the actual weeds and
Yeah, I think
proofread.
that's a great point and question, that there are statutory requirements that get you into the tactical stuff, right? You know, I think I may have said the last time I was here, if you stay in the system approach, I think I said probably to you all, don't ask why is it painted red, ask what is our process for determining paint color. Like if I ask why is it painted red, as soon as I do that, someone over there is just, okay, but I can get to the same place by asking what is our process for determining paint color. See, when I was on TRS, I had to learn how to ask that second question. I knew how to ask that first one. And again, I rolled in hot and I was asking them as fast as I could. But what I wasn't seeing was the system. I was getting so far down into it, I wasn't backing up. The strategic role should be thinking about negative unintended outcomes. This is the team to think about negative unintended outcomes. If we do too much, if we shove something, what's the ripple of the shove, right? So I think I hear what you're saying, Ms. Brown, and I appreciate the question. You may be, the board, the Texas Education Agency doesn't necessarily support these three roles. Or our, maybe not TEA, but our state legislature. They don't know about this, you know, so they may give you something that's a tactical thing. Go to it, do what you need to do, but you don't have to exit your strategic mindset when you're there, in my opinion. And that's what I had to learn on the TRS board. I never leave my strategic mindset, even if I'm down in the weeds on something. Okay, we also had a graphic, Mr. Hilliard, of arrows aligning and going different directions. You remember that one, or that might have been one that came after the fact. We called it stages of maturity, or aligned arrows in stages of maturity. And so as we're looking for it, so it's just stage one, and the arrows are going a bunch of different directions. Ms. Grandma, do you remember? And then stage two, some of the arrows are starting to line. And stage three, they're all pointing the same direction. And then stage four, they're literally cascading on top of each other. And I love that graphic, but there's really not enough to it when you just look at the graphic. So this chart, real briefly, and then the rest of the handouts are all supporting handouts. I just want you to know that. But I wanted to talk briefly. about the difference between stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. And I would ask you all, this is the aligning subsystems. And I would like you to think, well, Dr. Micah, not to put you on the spot, but I would assume that the reason you're interested in an approach like a scorecard, especially coming out of a pandemic, is because you felt like all other superintendents of state that we had all gotten into stage 1 where we're just reacting because every day the mandate's coming to do it differently, right? One of our first conversations was we're just playing whack-a-mole like everybody else. We got to get out of it. That's stage 1, right? Like it's just everybody's working hard. Maybe everybody's heart's in the right place, but the arrows are just like, which mandate are we chasing today? Okay, so that was our conversation at probably a convention that we start looking at a scorecard and it's like, okay, so my point is just implementing a balanced scorecard approach as a performance management system, I think by definition gets you out of stage 1 into stage 2. Is that fair enough? Because if you read those definitions, we don't have clear alignment to where this ultimately winds up. You have that now. Now, I may be wrong, but I would just say, where are you in 2? Now I'm going to change it to, are you 2.1? Are you 2.2? Are you 2.3? 2.4? You probably should be somewhere in stage 2 when you're in your first full year of implementation or just finishing up your first full year. Now I'm going to go back to team trust from the beginning conversation, and I'm just going to say it real bluntly. You could be, just like any other district, stuck in stage 2, back to that conversation about levels of trust. So you got the scorecard put in place, you went from 1 to 2, but you could be in 2 for the rest of your life. You can't go to 3, you definitely cannot go to 4 without team trust. I'll just say it that bluntly. That's back to that, because then we start gaming, tactical team members start shutting down, we can't really get to the truth because we're fearful of what may happen if we tell the truth. So you're stuck forever. Otika and I show horses now, and I started out at 50 years old. I'm 57 now. And, I remember about the 3rd year, I got mad enough to get better because it's like I don't want to be the 58-year-old novice because, like I'm getting beaten by 14-year-old kids, because I'm in novice. So, but I made a decision to work really hard and get better to get out of novice. Now I really don't care. There's like 10 more divisions. I just didn't want to be a novice anymore, right? So I got out of stage 1. And that's not completely true because she won't let up on me. Like she's, like, nope, next year you need to be in this division, and this division. But it's very similar. It was easy actually to get out of novice. I just had to remove mistakes. And then I was out of stage 1. The journey from 2 to 3 to 4 for me in that metaphor is much harder because it's not just eliminating mistakes, it's actually honing my skill, honing my craft, getting better at showing that I'm in control of the horse with very little hand and leg movement. This is just happening. If you're doing it right, it looks like nothing's happening, but a lot of stuff is happening. So it's your journey from 2 to 3 and maybe 3 to 4. The framework is there. Dr. Micah has put that forth. The tactical team understands it. In a district this size, Dr. Micah, it's probably fair to say it takes a bit to cascade it. Is that fair to say? Okay. But the framework is there to get from 1 to 2. Now we're at a really critical juncture of, do we get stuck in 2 or do we move to 3 and 4? And so, that would be my challenge to you tonight. Is the board's role of modeling continuous improvement, as we previously spoke about, to help the district move from early stage 2 to late stage 2. Any questions or thoughts on those stages? There's a positive presupposition here that you want to be stage 4. Sorry, I should have said that right up front. No one's comfortable with stage 2, I'm assuming, or stage 1 for sure. Dr. Micah, is it fair to say that just the scorecard process in and of itself, would you agree with that assessment? It moves you from 1 to 2? Because when you look at those processes and outcomes, like, okay, now we have strategic direction, so like we're out of one, and we're somewhere probably in two early systematic approaches. President Grona, let me see if there's any questions. Any questions? I'm trying not to read to you and just kind of give you some things to think about. I am not going to tell you how to think, but I will tell you what I think you ought to think about. I think you ought to think about those stages as we're progressing here, and what does it take to get to 2, 3, and 4. In the back of your packet, just in kind of wrapping up this section before we look specifically at your data, there's a checklist for board practices that are leading with and by the way, I apologize, we start using the acronym BSC, that's Balanced Scorecard. So we start saying BSC, so that's your scorecard approach to your performance excellence. And these 100%, this handout that I'm sharing with you tonight is what I carry. I had this, not with this logo on it, but my own typed up version of it at my seat at the dais on the TRS board. This is what I carried with me. So I kept referencing it, and then trustees were like, just give us the stuff that just give it to us. And so I gleaned all of the research and materials on, best practices and how do I stay in the strategic role. And I think there's 23 of them there. I'm going to do my best. I taught 6th graders and I taught 12th graders, so I'm going to wait y'all out. So of those 23, does anything catch your eye as something that feels good that you're looking at it, or something that's a challenge, this checklist for board best practices? Have you done number 1?
We, as this team, have not done that. That our mission statement, I don't know, when was the last time we looked at that?
We
Okay.
did that
And so,
back in 21, going into 22, early 22.
Yeah.
So-
a couple of
We
years.
did the last time we went through a lot of this stuff. We
Yeah.
did address all of that, but that was prior to Mrs. Landry, Ms. Filler being on the board.
What about 2? 4 perspectives. Think about your scorecard. Student, staff, stakeholder,
Stakeholders,
stewardship.
stewardship.
I remembered it was all S's. It's a little different but I love it. I love it. The 4 S's. That's number 2.
mhm.
Number 6 is what we've been talking about a lot tonight. Any of them challenging? Thank you, ma'am. The board models trust and collaboration, setting the expectations for the 3 essential roles. And how many times tonight, you may be counting, I've said the performance level is set with the level of trust, right? That's number 9. Thank you for sharing that. I believe strongly in that. Stephen M. R. Covey's book, The Speed of Trust, that's what that whole big, thick book is about. The performance level of any organization cannot exceed the levels of trust from the leadership. It's a good book.
I would just say we're still working on getting the final progress measures, because obviously being data-driven, it's the development process, but we're starting to review, but we need to have, in my opinion, the clear set objectives so that as we're looking at it, hey, we're going to improve. And I know Dr. Micker's working on some of this stuff, but we're getting to the point where I think as a board, we need to get this to where we have that data and saying, okay, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and be able to, we're getting data now, but we haven't clearly seen, I'm still looking at our scorecard getting to that piece, which I think we're getting close to getting there, but we're a year and a half, almost 2 years into this, so.
Yeah.
we're getting
Well,
close to
I
that point.
can tell you it's probably not from lack of data. I'm sure your tactical team has.
No, it's not that. It's
Yeah.
what is the right thing that we're going to, evaluate and then
Yes.
monitor that, where we can continue to look at that continuous process improvement piece once again.
Thank you. Okay, so you're helping me, Mr. Hilliard, think Since I was last here, President Grover, seriously, I've probably been at 100 board meetings. I mean, in that year. And it's just interesting what I'm observing. This is just an observation, but I'm not saying it's statistically significant, but it's a tenth of the districts in the. If I asked all 7, or in your case 6 trustees, how much data is enough, I would get 7 completely different answers. I've seen a few grand, so I'm thinking that may be true here. It happens every time. So here's what has to happen, in my opinion. There has to be consensus, not just the tactical team tries to make a presentation for one trustee. This month it's going to be about Miss So-and-so because she wants a lot of data. Next month, let's shorten it because that's what Mr. So-and-so wants. I mean, you see what I'm saying? Like, there has to be this consensus that's reached on what's enough data and what's too much, quite frankly, for the board to. The education code says that the trustees, you hire for a superintendent, adopt a budget, some of these other things that Mr. Byer was mentioning, and right in the middle of that, it says that you are the oversight of management, which clearly means not management, right? If you're the oversight of management, that means that's management. Management falls right there, and their direct reports. So the question you're answering as a team is how much is enough data, how much is too much for us to fulfill our statutory requirement of oversight. And it's almost 100% of the boards that we're working with, 100 and some odd. One of the greatest challenges is the trustees agreeing on what's the right amount of data, just so you all know. That's not an uncommon thing.
And is that what we're going to talk about under number 5 down here? Scorecard reporting protocols?
Yes.
Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Well, I'm depending on those results, but if that, I saw y'all kind of nod and grin, then that's probably going to show up in the data. But we definitely, I put that on this list. Yes, Ms. Groen, I put that on this list because that's very common across the state right now.
Okay.
That we've got to get clarity around what this scorecard reporting protocol needs to look like. Dr. Micah, I don't take this the wrong way, but you don't necessarily care. You just want to know what the plan is. Is that fair? Okay. I didn't ask him that. I was the next superintendent. We will do it, but we just need clarity so the tactical team doesn't have to play a guessing game. That's the most challenging part, having them guess at what the board needs. It's completely unfair for them. And they'll do a good job. But I'm telling you, I've been in those conversations. This time we'll give them a bunch of data because that's what one of them likes. And next time we won't give them any because that's not the right approach. I've tried that. Like, we have to we have to talk between the two roles and then find the right protocol. We want it to be a synchronistic and harmonious cadence between the board and the tactical team. Synchronistic, meaning we're hand in glove. Harmonious, meaning there's high levels of satisfaction on the strategic team with the amount of information that's coming, and there's high levels of satisfaction from the tactical team and trust on the receipt of that information that we're meeting the board's needs, basically. All right, as we look at the second page, are our results ready? That's Ms. Turner, okay. So we do have the results, but so if we describe what it looks like if the board is performing, there's 20 signs that help me. Like, this was the list. Actually, I kept this page folded back to this. What does it look like when I leave the role of the board in TRS? That's where this list came from. I was doing my own research when I got on the TRS board. Instead of asking the tactical team to make a question that I had part of the presentation. Do you see? I wasn't asking the tactical team at TRS to include something in a presentation. I was just doing it myself, making copies of it and bringing it and passing it out. Wrong. Best way to be the worst board member on earth, I found out. That's why David Colanetta told me my process is stunk. Any of the other 20 jump out to you? Look at nonverbal, number 20. Are there nonverbal cues?
Yes, but I always sit with my arms crossed. That's just a bad habit.
When, you know, I know with the trustees in SCUC, and y'all know, I mean, we had some tough times. You know, it wasn't like cakewalk, but you know, they were always unified. I'll give them credit. I mean, they weren't uniform. Rarely were they uniform. Sometimes during those tough times, there would be events that the kids were performing, and you know, it went to camps. You know, like 2, 5, and you know, front row, Clemens Band concert, 7 seats reserved. 5 of them were there, 2 are not there. And I'm like, no. Actually, there's 8 seats, me and I'm like, I don't care, gentlemen. We will sit on the front row. But I would sit right, yep, put your arm around him, give him a kiss. I don't care. People are watching. I mean, so that was you know, and that because if I'm a community member and I look, there's 2 vacant seats, and then I look, there's 2 standing, then my trust in the system is going down because I can't see that there's enough uniformity to even sit beside each other. I'm just saying that as an example. I know that was the way it was. When I got to TRS, wherever I sat, the other trustees left, you know, so, but I found out why, you know, I needed to earn them back. Anything else on that list of 20 that resonates with anyone? Wouldn't it feel good to, with any meeting, to feel like you don't have to have a meeting after the meeting? You know what I mean? Like we got it done. We were in there and we did our job, and you know, we performed our role, and there's no need to have meetings after the meeting.
Well, and I think, and more recently we've had disagreements on how we're going about certain things of business, but I think ultimately one of the things, and I'm not aware of this, of any of us going out and saying, well, maybe I was on the side of the vote that didn't go whichever way I wanted it to
Right.
go. But I'm not necessarily out saying, I think that was the dumbest decision the board's ever
Right.
made. You
Just
know,
don't agree with it.
I didn't present my argument well enough, or we didn't have that discussion, maybe that went the way I wanted it to go from the people I heard in the community, but at the end of the day, there is a collective vote and discussion about it, and so I think even though we disagree, I think we've gone with, okay, well, that's what the majority wanted, and that's, you know, that's where we're gonna head. So, so not disrupting board business and what our tactical group has to accomplish on a day-to-day
Yep.
day-to-day basis, but, you know, it's okay to have that disagreement. I know we've gotten into a little bit that one of these was sort of calling out individual members, and I think we've unfortunately gotten into some of that recently, and probably need to be mindful of that going forward.
Yeah,
But,
again, it's the appearance,
yeah,
you know, and if most people perceive that if I see, Mr. Bauer, what you're talking about in an open meeting, that it must be 100 times worse than that on the street, right? Like if I can see that in a duly called meeting, then it's got to be, and it may not be, but I'm led to only conclude that, right? I love David Pivot to death, and when he took a vote, if he was in the minority, he would say, like, you know, the vote's over and you want to just move on, and he would say, well, we're not supposed to talk about this once the votes, or once the meeting is adjourned, so I'm going to take the mic for a while and tell everybody why I think this was wrong, and then I won't say it again. And but everybody's okay. You know, it's like he said, that's why I think this was the wrong vote, but I accept I bet he said it 100 times while I was in SAUC, but I accept it, and you'll never hear those words coming out of my mouth again. So like I'm finished, like I just said it. Thank you, Mr. Bauer, for sharing that. Okay, and then do you all see there's some broad self-reflective questions, and then some overarching questions for the full board to consider, and so President Groner, you know, when we're potentially the item you pointed out to earlier, you know, on this, our process for scorecard reporting, these might be good questions to have in front of us, right? Because like, that's the itch you're trying to scratch, you know, with those questions. And then, Mr. Bauer, earlier with your example, those sample strategic questions are for individual board members, like how do I stay in the strategic role? President Groner, there's a couple of other documents in the packet. Again, they're resource documents. I'm getting the signal that we're ready to debrief.
Do we want to debrief that first before we come talk about what we were talking about, the scorecard?
I think
You think that's better?
I think
Okay.
that's better because then we can, probably that data can support or not support that those are the right things for us to consider debriefing.
Okay. All right, so we're going to adjourn into executive session, and the time is 6:39. Okay, sorry, we're back in open session, 8:10.
Madam President, board members, Dr. Micah, executive staff, and guests. We had a good debrief, Dr. Micah and staff members, seriously, with regards to the team trust, and there's some good follow-up actions that the board and I have discussed. With respect to the good governance inventory, the results from this year compared to last year are very similar. One of the items that is persistently kind of upside down from where we want it to be is board advocacy. And, you know, we had a good conversation in respect to the team trust piece of that some of advocacy, I think we think about as like being at the Capitol and, you know, doing all those things and advocating for the kids at a state and or federal level. But truthfully, advocacy starts at home, and it's about coherence, and it's about board and superintendent, and 100% of the board and the superintendent being on the same page and sharing the same key talking points. So what I might recommend, President Grona, looking at these results for the good governance for the good governance inventory, is to capture a follow-up workshop where we capture some of the items that we had talked about that we feel like would help with team trust in the form of norms, and those to be embedded in a good governance handbook, which is not meant to replace existing board operating guidelines, but to incorporate existing board operating guidelines into a good governance handbook, where we not only typically with board operating guidelines kind of describe the bumper rails or the bumper guards or the guardrails around, you know, what the board can and cannot do, but start it with a clear description of where we want to go as a board with good governance. You have an election coming up where, you know, there are a lot of seats up. I think it's a beautiful time to describe what our expectations as a team for good governance and codify it, if you will, prior, you know, to those elections. I don't know. Someone asked me the other day, what's the right time to write a good governance handbook? You know, my answer is yesterday, you know, because it's just, we say we did things, we say we do things, but if we don't have them in writing and transparent, you know, then they start slipping and getting lost. In addition to the good governance handbook and the norms, Dr. Micah, Ms. Grona, I'm sure will follow up, but I think like a good next step is a strategic roundtable with trustees and senior leaders to just look at the next iteration of the scorecard, and be happy to be part of that conversation if the board so desires. It was my pleasure to be here tonight.
Thank you so much for being here and facilitating this and walking us through that. I think we got a lot accomplished, I feel like. Does anybody have anything else for Mr. Gibson? Dr. Gibson, sorry.
It's Greg. Dr. Gibson retired.
Dr. Gibson retired.
Thank you so much.
Yep, it was my pleasure.
Okay, great. All right, well, with that, we're going to adjourn, and the time is 8:13.
Yeah.